Welcome to the Happy Fools podcast. I am broadcasting from the dusty storage area in my crawl space, joined, as always, by Alfredo, but it's Alfredo with a new microphone. We can hear him great, ladies and gentlemen. Alfredo,
Let's
how are
see.
you?
Good morning. Well, good morning from us. Uh, you know, yeah, I was trying.
Good evening from Peter.
That's right. Good
Late
evening for
afternoon,
Peter.
evening. Yeah, I mean, we've
It's a what,
got,
five?
yeah, about five-ish, coming up to five.
Amazing.
But
Amazing.
we've got nice long summer days today, so it's like daylight until 9 o'clock still. So
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it looks
yeah,
sunny. It looks sunny out your window. I didn't know you guys had
yeah,
that in there.
It's really humid here though. It's like almost unbearably humid at the moment. Whew.
Mm, sounds like
Yeah.
Florida. Um, well, yeah, we got Alfredo with a new mic. We've got Peter back for round three. Where do you guys want to start? I'll just say that I am sick as a dog. So
No
I'm
Oh,
way.
kids, summer school, they bring home like Ebola and dengue fever, and they bring home all sorts of crazy stuff from their little petri dish compatriots at school. So yeah, so I might be a little quieter than normal, but that's fine because we got Alfredo here. So where do you guys want to start?
well, Alfredo, did you catch up with the last two
Oh, don't
episodes?
don't put him on the spot. He's gonna tell you no.
No, I'm trying to purposefully embarrass him.
Oh, none. I'm not. I wish I can have be embarrassed now and then. No, not at all, man. I was just. Everyone knows I've been so busy.
How do we?
Blank
So let's
slate.
let's recap it for him. We spoke
Thank you.
about we spoke about some really cool English history, and every I'm finding it's not just America. Every country probably has their own like official story, and then their
Hmm.
unofficial story. So that certainly sounds like it's the case with Britain. And we talked a bit about this King Arthur individual, although not a ton, actually,
Not
just a
a
little
lot.
bit.
No. Yeah. So I think one of the first points I wanted to make about the British tradition rather than the English tradition is that Arthur is just like he's like the cherry on the icing on the cake. There's just so much underneath him. Everyone knows Arthur. That's the sort of famous bit, but there's like a whole wealth of culture and history underneath it, just like under the surface, which is equally as fascinating. And we just don't really hear about even in modern day England because of this sort of divide between the Celtic nations of Britain and the English Germanic nation of Britain. Um,
And we
so
talked a little bit about maybe teenage Jesus and his uncle spent some
yeah,
time in Britain.
Oh man,
yeah,
I
yeah,
need I need to hear that episode then.
This
Thank
is
you.
not
yeah.
this is not like a fringe thing. I realize this is like a pretty well known, I don't know, it's like myth or belief. Even
Absolutely, yeah.
one of your more famous. What is the song Jerusalem? What would you liken that to
It's
for
it's
us?
a hymn. It's a full-blown hymn for singing in church. But yeah, written by William Blake, one of the
Wow.
Britain's most famous romantic poets. But yeah, it's about Jesus being in Britain. Did these feet walk on pastures green? It's that's a horrible misquote, by the way.
But that
It's
you kind
yeah,
of
it's about the missing years of Christ and whether he visited Britain or not.
and you kind of substantiated the idea a little bit, although I don't think that was your intention. But you brought up this burgeoning tin trade between the
Hmm.
Levant and Britain. And what would that be like 1500 BC? So-
1500 BC, yeah, but carrying right on through, the evidence seems to just be that those trade networks just carried on for millennia afterwards as well. So,
So this would
I,
not be like an unusual or impractical thing to happen.
no, absolutely not. People traveling backwards and forwards between these areas shouldn't have been outrageous. And of course, as soon as the Roman Empire starts, it's perfectly acceptable that people moved between these areas.
Right.
As soon, it's kind of interesting. Before the empire, oh, we don't know if these people can remove. As soon as the empire makes the connections, oh yeah, people can go backwards and forwards, no problem. Well, surely the same connect. It may not have been as safe. Maybe it was safer under Roman rule. A bit more security and protection of your goods and things like that. But the same technology, still had boats, they still had ports, they still had a need for trading goods. I mean,
Right.
you can look at the Roman Empire as essentially like a big, kind of like buy-in uh, trading network anyway. You pay in, you get the gear, you get the security, and you get your money and you get your nice Roman clothes and your oil and things like that out of it.
I didn't know
Um,
that, but when you join the Roman army, you get compensated well, more than your typical common people. I mean, they like you said, they give you food,
hmm.
clothing, even like retirement plan if you make it
Yeah,
that
and
far. And
the,
so that
the,
was very appealing, and that's why they attracted so many young dudes
yeah,
right into it because you were basically prestige wherever you would go. It's like, oh, that's a Roman soldier. Be careful. Special
and the
training, housing, everything.
and the real carrot was citizenship as well.
That's
If you
right.
got your 15 years, you got your citizenship. You
That's
weren't
right.
a servant, you were a Roman citizen,
Which
which
is highly right coveted
yeah, yeah, you
position status. Right, right.
owning
That
your
was pretty
property,
amazing.
all that stuff. Yeah.
You also mentioned William Blake. Is that the painter?
Yes,
William
absolutely.
Blake?
Yeah. Painter, poet, your
I
polymath.
went, yeah, they had an exhibition last year at the Getty. Quite amazing at the Getty
Oh,
here.
it's
And oh
phenomenal.
my goodness, it's like, who is this guy? And they had almost all his paintings just for a period of time, but it's quite amazing. Have you seen him, Trevor, the William Blake's? I took
No,
pictures. I actually have a wallpaper from it. Quite impressive. He was a
I'm
bit
uncultured.
mystical kind of
Yes,
guy, though, right? Quite
he
a
has
bit.
his own philosophy, is
Right.
uh, very much inspired by Milton, John
That's
Milton.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Lost Paradise.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
he's very much inspired by
Right.
Milton. There's some very
Right.
similar themes and ideas
Right.
that
That's a great
echo.
book.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the paintings he came out from that, or some of them, sketches, are quite impressive.
Hmm.
Yeah. Oh,
Absolutely.
that's cool. So he's the one who kind of was also pushing this idea of
Blake was
Jesus in
into some
England.
he was into
Yeah.
some very interesting ideas yeah, and law, shall we say.
Yeah. Lore. Yeah.
Um, uh, and there's loads of interesting people who've picked up along these things along the way. And I think I mentioned once in the first one, Tolkien is another who was he's a massive
That's
fan of the
right. Of
Welsh
course.
language.
Can I ask
His
you something?
favorite, yeah.
What's up with? I've always wanted to ask someone from there. What is it with this island that produces so much art and and science? But I mean, you got so many musicians from there. It's crazy. Like
Yeah, well,
I've never seen
music.
that from one little place can produce so much stuff.
So Wales is interesting because Wales is always known as the land of song as well. This is where the bards
Mm.
came from, and the bards were one of the main parts of the Druidic order. So you had the Druids, the bards, and the Ovates. The bards were they were poets and had to do with recording history and stories. The Druids were obviously the religious thinkers and teachers, and I think the Ovates dealt with law.
So
Um,
they've been practicing for a few hundred years
Well, how long is a very good
or
question.
more, right?
Yeah, I mean, some people like there was an old idea that say the Neolithic stone circles and stuff were Druidic temples. That was a very traditional idea that is now completely no one
Debunked.
interested in at all. And then we also have modern Druidic orders, and there's an idea that they are in no way connected to the Druidic orders of, say, like the early Roman period and stuff like that. Um, but the problem is firstly about the first connection between the Neolithic and when the Druids might have started practicing, is this is prehistory. We don't have a fucking clue,
Hmm.
to put it bluntly. So
Hmm.
to say there is no connection between the Druids in, say, the Iron Age Britain and people practicing at stone circles in the Neolithic period, say, oh, there's definitely no connection. Based on what?
Right.
What evidence do you have to suggest that?
Right. Right.
We can see that cultures have changed. We can see that material culture, we can see that burial practices have changed. We can maybe see that some of these stone circles have fallen out of use in certain periods. But to say there is absolutely zero connection between, the stone circles and whatever, the henges,
Yeah.
and the Iron Age Druids is a complete guess.
I would be
So
pretty proud. I would, you know what I mean? Like if I, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way. Like, yeah, we got something going on. You know, we
yeah.
can contribute to the world. You know, being from the UK, and still is considered as like, whoa, UK. You know,
Well, I tell you what Trevor said about uh, countries wanting to put out a like a historical or archaeological image of themselves, you know. Um, Britain had one of the, well, in terms of recorded history, one of the world's first empires.
right,
So surely right from early on, this is going to be a state that's interested in uh, propaganda,
right.
in manipulating people's views of how they seen themselves.
Still,
So still, not only yeah, still, and also going back, this isn't something that started in like after the Second World War with the CIA. This sort of um, realpolitik. Uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, Manipulation of image, manipulation of ideas in order to put something about across themselves. It's been
right.
going on for a very long time. Countries have been doing this for thousands of years, and there's no doubt that a country like which was once the British Empire has obviously also had their finger in this pudding and has
Hmm.
been very, very much interested in what history gets said about them,
I made a.
essentially.
I, this is only kind of tangentially related to what you guys are talking about, but I think I made a comment to you before, Peter.
Hmm.
America is kind of maybe critiqued for Hollywood being such an incredible exporter of culture. But if you look at any American movie, 70% of the actors are British. It's amazing the
Well,
amount of
Right,
British actors are, and
right,
all the time you'll watch an interview of an actor, and you're like, I didn't know they were British.
right.
Like, you know, I mean, I think everyone in Walking Dead was British. Is it? It's like
yeah, they all were
all of
then.
the action stars are British. Everybody is British. It's crazy. Like the per capita amount of actors is hilarious. And
Well, I
so,
mean, if you want to stop the King Arthur right now, or actually all my graduate studies are in film and film history, so
oh, nice.
Oh no
we
way.
could do a whole thing about,
Oh man.
about why Hollywood has lots of foreigners and stuff like that.
Well, in
Uh,
like in like the old school Disney movies, a lot of them were kind of British stories or set in England. Prince and the Pauper, Sword in the
yeah,
Stone, like all these movies. So you guys definitely we learned how to export cultural propaganda from the best, I
yeah.
think, here in
I
America.
mean, that's the
Right.
thing. Well, that's the thing is that although, okay, all the actors are British, but then 95% of movies in British cinemas are American movies.
The
And guess
student
what?
has become the master,
The
Peter.
That's
money
right.
doesn't stay here. Warner Brothers might have a big studio making Harry Potter films in London, but the money doesn't stay here. It just goes right back over to the States. Um,
Well,
and
yeah,
that's like a
obviously.
last. Sorry, I could go on for hours about that, so maybe we should just very slip away. But generally, it's the Nazis' fault that there's lots of Europeans in Hollywood.
That's
Um,
always a safe group of
the
people to
sim
blame for
it's
stuff.
this it's the symbol, and it is quite true in this sense. So, uh, and a lot of them came via Britain. So, you've
Oh,
got a lot of Brits
interesting.
on the way.
Yeah, we got quite a bit of stuff from the Nazis. We won the Cold War because of the Nazis, so that was von
Bloody
Braun,
good.
NASA, all that stuff. But anyway, so yeah, we've been touching on, we've kind of been alluding to King Arthur this whole time. We've
Yeah,
been talking about British history and English history, and so obviously the Jesus in England thing is fascinating. But just to set that aside for a second, let's zone in, let's zoom in on either King Arthur or Pendragon.
cool. Yeah. So, I think I'm just going to throw a bit of a spanner in the works, in as much as I've been trying to educate you, Trevor, on a difference between Saxon English and the in the East and the Brythonic, um,
Yes.
either the Welsh or the Cornish, in the West, which traditionally known as Celtic or something like that. Um, I'm going to throw another spanner in the works because I think I've been a bit hard on the English, to be honest. I
Now,
mean,
if you could just quickly translate that phrase, throwing a spanner in the works, is that like throwing a wrench
yes,
to things?
wrench. Yes,
Okay, okay,
absolutely.
gotcha,
Yeah,
gotcha, gotcha.
there you go.
All
Your
right, sorry.
sabots, your clogs. Um,
Continue. I don't speak English, so please continue.
a wrench. Yeah. Um, I've completely now I've gone into tools. Right.
Sorry.
So yeah, we're going to throw another group in. So I was a bit hard on the English. I mean, I am English, so I can be hard on the English. That's fine. But I think we're going. It's interesting to bring up Tolkien again because he he saw he thought of Germanic, Saxon, and Celtic as a bit of a false dichotomy. Um, he saw these both as a something that was authentic in British culture, like for the whole islands, and that's what like you can make an argument for that's what Lord of the Rings is. It's a revival of that authentic traditional British tradition, whether that be Germanic and Saxon, because there's a huge Germanic influence in Tolkien's work. He's very interested in Scandinavian languages, for example, and then the mythos that goes with it. But also, there's this Celtic Welsh element which really drives him. And when you look at, there's a fantastic speech he gives where he really goes into this. And I'll send you a link for the video actually to put in the show notes. Someone going through that speech. It's really good. Um, so he saw this as a bit of a false dichotomy, and he really saw the enemies as a group called the Normans. So you may have heard of the Normans before. The Normans were descendants of Vikings, literally Norsemen, who settled in northern France, right? In modern day Normandy, where the D-Day landings were. And essentially, the Normans became the aristocratic power of Western Europe from about 1000 AD onwards. A series of brilliant campaigns in various places, including Britain. They just became the big dudes everywhere. It's a really important moment in British history. This date, 1066. That was the Battle of Hastings, where William, Duke of Normandy, William the Conqueror, arrives in southern England. He beats the Saxon king, Harold Godwinson, and from then on, basically takes the rest of England in a very short period of time. When they come up against Wales, it's like hitting a brick wall. Okay. The Welsh
Hmm.
have the benefit of the mountainous regions. They know their land really well. The Saxons have spent 500 years trying to penetrate Wales and haven't managed to do it. Um, but these Normans then eventually worm their way all throughout the highest points of British society, whether it's by warfare or whether it's by marrying into the local aristocracy. And they they are seen as Tolkien's big enemy. He saw them as the end of the real, genuine culture.
Hmm.
Um, they brought their own style of Christianity as well, the way they were practicing. It was their money, their architectural styles, their warfare styles, and you can really see that. So the word orc is an Old English word which refers to a Norman knight. So
Oh, wow.
that's what Tolkien thought of the
Oh
Normans,
wow.
essentially. Okay. Um, and just to really hammer this home is that the descendants of those Normans that took over England in that period are essentially still the major landowners of Britain today,
Mm.
over 1,000 years, well, 1,000 years later. The majority of them are still the same people holding the same positions, the same people, the descendants of the same people holding the same positions, including unelected positions in the House of Lords, where they can
Mm.
make decisions about government policy as well.
I like this because very rarely can you blame a group of people for all the problems without getting in trouble. But as far as I know, nobody cares about the Normans.
No, 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 no. I mean, there's not a lot of people who are descended from
We
Normans.
could say anything we want about these damn Normans.
Because it represented, they really were an aristocratic class moving in and bumping people off the top. The Saxons had it rough under them, although, it's all to do with who greases whose palms.
Yeah.
Eventually, when it came to, the first conquest of Ireland, they call it the Cambro-Norman conquest because it was the Welsh aristocracy married into the Norman aristocracy that then went over into Wales, into Ireland. Um, so so just to when I then talk about the English establishment, say today or later on, really we're talking about an Anglo-Norman establishment, right? Um, rather than to do with Saxon culture per se, because we can pretty much say that Saxon culture has been as much kind of diminished as Brythonic culture is. But today, when it comes to academia, there is still this heavy leaning on the English side of it, rather than looking at our Western neighbours and seeing what they can also contribute to the story. And
That is
certainly,
interesting.
certainly growing up, I felt like I was learning half a story. And then when you hear about, stuff from Scotland, from Ireland, from Wales, suddenly the whole thing makes sense. Right? You get a full picture.
Yeah, I've been continuously blown away by the richness and complexity of your history. I mean, that's true, I think, for all histories,
Oh,
but
anyway, yeah.
we get kind of like a boiled down like slogan,
Mhm.
for that we learn in school, which isn't
Yeah.
We got a
true.
similar, yeah, we got a similar propagandish. So the SAP in Mexico is the Secretary of Education, Public Education, which is so the entire book history is not real. They basically teach you how to not discriminate, but hate, to be honest, the Spaniards, right?
Mhm.
Oh, right.
And
Okay. Yeah.
that's such a huge fault because you grow up basically in a bit of a hatred kind of mode. Like, oh, we don't, they stole everything. They got all women, and but it's not true. None of it.
Mm.
And if you really look at the other side of the coin, uh, it's such a huge influence. And then when you go back to that country, and then you look at the whole architecture and the real history where they're from. It's like, oh, I'm learning, like what you just said, Peter, the other side. And like I knew it. It's like meeting because I took my kids. Well, they're not kids anymore, but growing up, man, is like, Dad, how did that feel? It's like it felt like I met my dad,
Mm.
and I was
Mhm.
raised by my mom, which is Mexico, right? And you were
Yeah. Yeah.
told one story, and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, this is dad. That's kind of
Yeah.
cool. I kind of like it. I guess that's the history of pretty much a lot of the countries, right? Because they were invaded or someone
Absolutely.
else, the winners write the history, right?
Yeah. Of course. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the true things forever, isn't it? Really. That.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The victors write the history. So.
Yeah.
Um. Yeah. So these Normans. I mean, to the point that another thing about Norman history is this. That they loved Arthur as well. So they'd already come into contact with Arthur because Normandy and France. Oh, well, let's have a little share, shall we?
Yeah,
Let's get this up.
How's my sound, Trevor?
beautiful.
Is it? Okay.
Cool.
Yes.
Right. So, yeah,
Oh,
so
yeah.
so yeah, we've
Love
got
maps.
so we've got Brittany here. This is Brittany of the Britons, and this just shows Normandy here. So they are right next door to each other. So the Normans had already encountered the Bretons and had already encountered Arthur's history before they then came up into Britain and encountered the Welsh. And Geoffrey of Monmouth, who we talked about before, who provided us with the first real narrative of Arthur. You could say that he's of the Norman aristocracy. I mean, he's often called a Breton himself. Um, Sometimes Breto-Norman or something like that. They're not really sure, to be honest. But it's really hard to tell. But there is definitely a curiosity with the Normans with Arthur. Like they're already involved in it. Um, this could be because they've also married into Breton aristocracy, so there could be some idea that they feel like they are inheriting Arthur's uh, tradition and kingdom. Um, I think there's certain problems. Some people call Geoffrey Anglo-Norman propaganda. I think there's a problem with that because it doesn't really serve any Anglo-Norman benefit. It's much more of a text for the Britons. Maybe Cambro-Breton would be appropriate. Oh, actually, before I start throwing these words out again, so if I was to say the words Devonian, Cornubian, Silurian, Ordovician, uh, Cambrian, you know what you heard these words before?
No, no, don't quiz
But
us. We
they're
don't know anything.
Oh, these are all geological ages. So if you heard of the
Okay, okay.
Oh, the
Silurian,
Oh,
Cambrian
sure,
age.
sure,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, the Silurian hypothesis is the idea that it might be a, you know. So these names were picked in geology from the regions where it displayed certain rock types of these ages associated with their pre-Roman tribe names. So uh, Devonian Canubian are both referring to the southwest where I am here in Dumnonia is from Devonian. It's a very similar word. Cambria and Cambrian is to do with Wales. The romantic name for Wales is Cambria because the Welsh call themselves the Cymry,
Hmm.
which is exactly the same name as the 10 tribes of Israel, by the way. But I'm sure that's a coincidence.
Yeah, of course.
Uh, they even used to spell it spelt with a C now, but it used to be spelt with a K,
Okay.
just like the 10 tribes are called the Cymry, but English typesetters didn't have enough Ks for Welsh language, so they changed their hard K sound to a C. So now
Hmm.
it's spelt with a C. So that's quite interesting. But
Wow.
um, Silurian and Ordovician are both pre-Roman tribes in Wales, and really we're going to be looking at the Silurian Arthur hypothesis. So Arthur of the Siluries, and the Siluries were from this area in southeast Wales. These are one of the famous tribes. I talked about King Caradoc last week, who may have his family may have had a role in bringing Christianity to Britain in the first century. He resisted the Romans for 10 to 15 years in this part of South Wales before eventually being defeated and taken to Rome. Um,
Real quick,
now,
Alfredo, that was something pretty interesting from the last episode that Peter laid out for us was this idea that by the time the Roman Catholic Church got to England, there was already an established Christian church there, and they kind of butted heads. And
Oh, interesting.
and so there's all sorts of political ramifications of that, I suppose.
yes,
Hmm.
absolutely. So the Saxons who are here on red in the map, they were pagans when they first arrived in Britain and were fairly promptly converted by the Catholic Church. But
How
there
long
was,
did that take?
uh,
Because they were
well,
hardcore, as I understand. The
yeah, I
Saxons were
mean, over the course of
hardcore
100, we're
pagans.
talking over the course of 100 years because these were
Yeah,
separate kingdoms, right? So
right.
to be converting one king at a time,
Well,
essentially.
it took Spain
Um,
400 years, so yeah, to
yeah.
convert all the natives.
Well, I mean,
Right.
yeah, I mean, I think conversion of the posh people is the important bit. Conversion of the ruling class,
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
what they don't really care what happens on ground level unless as long as the money's coming in.
that's
Um,
right.
so yeah, there was possibly some butting of well, I think there definitely was. It's recorded of how you practiced your Christianity. They got very funny
Mm.
with each other about it. Um, so. And from the Silurian Arthur, we'll go to Uther Pendragon. Ooh, right.
Let's do
So
it.
what I'm interested in, Alfredo, is finding a historical King Arthur, right? There is no doubt a lot of legendary and mythological information about Arthur, which could be thousands of years old and
Mm.
relates to cosmic stories. For instance, the bear or Ursa Major, the constellation which
Constellation. Mhm.
points to the North Star, is
Mhm.
the in Celtic languages the bear is Arth. So this
Mm.
is the beginning term of Arthur. So there's a lot of people who really, really favor this idea of a cosmic Arthur, and that any idea of a 6th century warlord or High King of Britain is just something that's been made up later on and dubbed onto the character, right? I don't think so. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive.
Mm.
I think there could have been this idea of the Great Bear and Arth and long before, and that then there was a High King of Britain whose name was possibly something similar to Arthur, and then the two have been tacked together, right? As has possibly happened with Moses and Abraham and Jesus and you know. Um, so what I want to do is you go back and you look at these earliest references and see what it tells us about these people. Now, there's a friend of mine called Caleb. He Caleb Howells. He's got some great books out. There's one called the man King Arthur, the Man Who Conquered Europe. He's we disagree on some details, but he's also very much in on the Silurian Arthur hypothesis. Um, he makes an excellent point, which is basically if we want to try and understand what people are saying in Arthur, we need to have a look at the very earliest things people said about him and try and distinguish from there if we can find anything else in history that might match up with that. Okay. So this is my problem with a mythological or cosmological Arthur, is that when you look at the earliest references to him, so we've got two early references. One of them's in Nennius, which is a collection of Historia Brittonum, it's called, written by a guy called Nennius or compiled by someone called Nennius. Um, this story just tells of 12 battles where Arthur was victorious and that he was the general or the leader of battles, Dux Bellorum, they call him, right? And then another mention, the next earliest mention is in an annals called the Annals Cambriae, and we get two mentions of Arthur. One of them says he fought at Badon and was very successful. Badon is also in Nennius's battle list as well. And then also um, about the Battle of Camlan, where him and Mordred died, his final battle, or him and Mordred fell, I should say. So from those two mentions, we've got no Holy Grail. We've got no Sword in the Stone. We've got no Lady of the Lake. We've got no um, magical doings whatsoever, right? Nothing like that. So, for starters, how do we then project back this ancient or mythological Arthur if our earliest mentions of him don't even reference any of that stuff? This
Right.
is something that gets added to the story over the next centuries in all the romantic novels, you know, the Vulgate cycle, etc.
Have you
Yeah,
seen
that's pretty
Have you
interesting.
seen The Northman, the movie by Eggers?
Is that a Viking one?
Yeah, yeah, Viking Nord. Yeah. Have you?
No. I don't think so.
Oh, it's a great film. I highly recommend it because it mentions how they basically conquered and how they're and their own religion and how they're bringing the offsprings. Great film. Highly
Yeah, so
recommend it.
this map on the right is all about the
Yep.
Viking
Yep.
conquest from Britain. And see,
Right.
they basically established their own country known as Danelaw here, right?
Right.
Right. And so Harold Godwinson, who was defeated by William the Conqueror in Hastings in 1066 down here,
Hmm.
he kind of gets a bit of a rough deal because he's remembered as the guy who's beaten. But literally days before this battle in Hastings in 1066, he had driven the last of the Vikings out of Britain. This
Wow.
Danelaw had completely gone, and he'd made the last final decisive battle which had driven them out. And then he
Mm.
had to ride all the way back down to the other end of the country to fight William the Conqueror and was beaten. Um, so so Harold Godwinson was an impressive king with a lot of power, and he did something we could have ended up with a whole other country in Britain, the Scandinavian Britain in the north, if it wasn't for Harold Godwinson and his actions. So
Mm.
it's a really interesting period and yeah, absolutely fascinating. But
How
we're
s-
jumping ahead a few hundred years there.
no, yeah, how strong or how common is the quote unquote tale of Arthur throughout the island, throughout
Oh,
England
it's
England?
everywhere, everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean,
The
uh,
mythological version.
yeah, I mean, Arthur appears in place names all over Scotland, all over Wales, all over the
Mm.
West Country. There's even Arthurian places in England. places that have Arthur associated with them. One thing that I'm is part of my research and what I'm interested in as well is not necessarily because some of these places will claim, well, Arthur is from here,
Hmm.
ergo he is not from there or there or there.
Hmm.
Whereas if Arthur was a High King, then I don't see why he wouldn't have had the power and influence to be in all of those areas. And maybe a lot of those stories, although they seem conflicting on the surface, might not be conflicting. Maybe this was Arthur's castle here and Arthur's castle down there in the south and there and Arthur's castle in the west, you know.
Yeah, we find the name Washington all over the place here. That doesn't mean he was, not from wherever.
Absolutely.
Um, so so the first mentions of Arthur sounds like are clearly historical. Where does the myth come from? Who's projecting these myths backwards in time to this historical figure,
Well,
do you
that's
think?
interesting because the next big contender would be Geoffrey of Monmouth. As I say, the first narrative of Arthur. But the most fantastical thing in Geoffrey is that Arthur goes off and conquers most of Europe, right? Including Scandinavia, Iceland, the
Hmm,
whole lot, you know, Germany, Rome. That's the most fantastical thing. In terms of actual magical events and things like that in Arthur,
none.
the most magical thing is that it is in his conception story. So Uther Pendragon, he falls in love with his neighbor, his not neighbor, who should we say? One of his chief advisors, very powerful person, Gorlois, Duke of Cornwall, right? Or Earl of Cornwall. And Gorlois has this lovely young wife. Uther Pendragon sees her and he thinks, oh, yeah, I gotta have that. Like he's driven wild by her to the point where he goes to war with Gorlois, his advisor and friend. Um,
These
now,
girls always get you in trouble, man.
yeah, yeah, right. Well, Uther does not behave nicely at all in this story
S-
whatsoever, and he
Sex,
gets Mer
drugs, and rock and roll.
That's
well,
right.
drugged is the right word because he asks Merlin to give him something, so she'll think that he is Gorlois and sleep with him.
Hmm.
And but the description, the word
Can,
they actually use is the word drugs. They don't call it a potion or something like that. They
can
call it drugs. It's
can I pause
Hmm.
you there? So when you
yeah.
say when you're telling the story and he asked Merlin for the drugs,
Hmm.
where is this recorded?
This is in Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae.
Okay, so Merlin was in Jeffrey. He just wasn't
Yes.
a wizard. He was a drug dealer.
Nar-
Well,
a narco.
well, yeah, I would. So the most magical thing that Merlin does in HRB, which is the nice, easy way of saying Historiam Regum Britanniae,
Hmm.
HRB, is that he can see the future.
That's not
That's
nothing.
the most magical thing. He gives Arthur drugs, right? Now, if he just gave him a load of speed, then Arthur could have just breezed in and just been like, "Yeah, I'm Gorlois," and everyone else would have been like, "Yeah, he's really confident about that. Let him in." You know, uh,
Yeah, it's a
I
little
don't know.
cooked up. You're confident when you're on that stuff. That's funny.
Merlin was also meant to be the one who brought the stones back from Wales sorry, from Ireland to bring to create Stonehenge.
Okay.
Merlin's credited with creating Stonehenge, and some
Oh,
people often quote it as saying he levitated the stones, but it
Okay.
doesn't actually say that in Geoffrey. It says he uses machines, pulleys, levers,
Okay.
right? Which is again, it's not magic; it's science.
So
So,
Merlin's part Archimedes, part narco. I
but
like
not yeah,
it. That's Alfredo said. So so okay, so you have some hints of the story, but nothing like what we have today. So, is this just a gradual thing? Like, can we find the
yeah.
first point in history when all of a sudden Arthur's
No.
pulling swords out of stones and Merlin's casting spells? Or
Well, it's from Chrétien onwards. So the
okay,
the first romances, and then those romances are popular for 600 years.
wow.
They are produced in France, in Italy, in Germany, in
Hmm.
Scandinavia, in Spain. It- just hundreds of different versions, um, dealing with the same. Again, do you remember me saying this before? Like it's almost like fanfic of sixth century Britain.
I was just gonna say that. I was just gonna
Yeah.
how long
Hmm.
ago is Arthur? This,
So the 6th century, so 1500 years ago, and it would
okay,
have
Wow.
so
been
if you imagine 1400 years of fan fiction about Benjamin Franklin, right?
yeah,
You could
yeah. What's
imagine
that going to turn
1400
into?
years from now, we're like, you believe Benjamin Franklin was real? Are you an idiot? Like, he's obviously flew through lightning storms and was Thor based on Thor and it used his lightning rods to blah, 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 blah. Like, that, it feels like that's what's going on here. I mean, 1600 years is not nothing. Like, that
Mhm.
is a big chunk of time. You can totally
Absolutely,
imagine someone becoming a myth who is real.
yeah. So I think someone tagged us in Metatron reviewing a Oxford Oxford Don, an Oxford professor talking about the history of Arthur, and she mistakenly said that the sword in the stone appears in Geoffrey of Monmouth, but it doesn't. As I say, there's very few of those mythical elements. The main story of Arthur is his conception, his rise to power. Um, there's suggestion of some wars that he might have to do, sort of internal fighting in order to get himself seen as High King. Then we see a series of battles where he's very successful against the Saxons, and then his demise in the civil war against his nephew Mordred.
So
Um,
that's sort of the real story. Where I don't want to hijack your flow here, but
no, go.
sounds like we get a lot of the myth from those early romances. Do we also get the Holy Grail and the Round Table and all this stuff from the
Yeah,
romances?
yeah. So there's a couple of because especially with the early romances, there were sort of these verse histories, which were still quite romantic and legendary, especially for modern historians who don't like that sort of thing. They're still a bit like that. One of them's called the Roman de Brute by a chap called Wace. Um, there's another early French one as well. Um, the Round Table is interesting. Again, Caleb, I was talking about the other day, he's produced an excellent little video recently, where he again just went back to the earliest sources. And do you remember I was talking about Caerleon with its amphitheater and how local archaeologists have called it, or say antiquarians called it King Arthur's Round Table for a while? Well, in apparently that earlier source that mentions the Round Table, they also say it's in Caerleon, and
Mm.
it can seat thousands of people.
Oh,
Well, a
interesting.
table can't seat thousands of people, but an
Yeah.
amphitheater can. Because it's Arthur's special coronation, where literally hundreds of guests are named, and obviously each guest would have had a plus one, a servant, uh, you know, somebody else with them. There would have been an entourage, essentially. So I think that the amphitheater at Caerleon is quite happily the round table.
Yeah, I like
Um,
it. I actually learned who invented the Round Table the other day.
oh, go on.
It was a gentleman named Sir Cumference.
Nice,
Sorry,
Trevor.
I apologize. I'm sorry, everyone. Please continue listening. Don't turn the show off. Peter,
Peter, sounds
sorry.
like you know a lot of Arthur. Have you, and a lot of other things. Have you, in your opinion, which one is the sim? Because propaganda is still being pushed, right, to
Hmm.
one way or another. Which one has been the closest, a movie, a film that is closest to the real story that
I
you
mean,
found?
let's sort of start out by saying I don't know what the real story is
Okay.
in terms of a history because we don't really know. Um, I
Well, that's a nice
really
screenplay
liked,
right there. You don't know. You can
yeah,
pretty much
well,
create everything. You can go about.
I quite like. Do you remember there was like a 90s? I preferred the first half of it to the second half. There was one with that Australian actor in it. Oh, I think it was called Merlin or something like that.
Okay.
Oh God, what's he called? The guy who was in Jurassic Park.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and
I
he
forget
played
his name.
Merlin. The first few
Ah,
episodes of that one, I think, show the like represent HRB quite well. They have the story of Vortigern
HRB.
and him trying to build his
Cool.
keep, and that's when they search for the child. Merlin. I've kind of ignored Merlin a bit, and hoping that we can kind of skim over him a bit because there's a bit of confusion with
Mm.
him and Aurelius Ambrosius Aurelianus, who is uncle of Arthur, who's sometimes confused for Arthur by some people. Um, Geoffrey kind of makes a mistake where he seems to double up, and he has Ambrosius, and then he has Merlin Ambrosius, and he kind of, or you get Merlin Ambrosius first, and then you get this Ambrosius character appear. But yeah, so he makes some sort of confusion there. So we
You
get these. Go on.
sorry to interrupt. I was just going to
No, no,
say,
it's
so
fine.
you earlier you mentioned some historical accounts of Arthur winning battles and stuff. These are who do these come from? Just some unnamed historian, some piece of
Yeah,
parchment?
so the Nennius, well, say Nennius is given to this name, given to this document. No one actually knows if he wrote it or compiled it, but that's the name that's gone with it, and it's called Historia Britonum, and it's this battle list. It's right at the end of Historia Britonum, and it has been argued about so much. Some people think it's like the comes from a poem or from
Mm,
a maybe some sort of maybe it's some sort of teaching device, you know, that's trying to
gotcha.
explain or make a point, and that's why the list. I mean,
But
what
chronologically, this is our first mention of Arthur.
yes, yeah, as
Okay.
far as we know, yeah.
Well, I mean, I tend to
And
believe
it's a couple of
first
centuries
stories.
after he died as
I tend
well.
to believe the first stories the most because, if there was this story going around about Arthur that he, pulled a sword out of a stone or whatever, and let's say that really happened, you would expect that to show up in the first story.
Yeah,
That's kind of like a punchline, you know.
absolutely. Yeah.
So
And what
Yeah,
what year what year is this?
I so that was written in so Nennius was written in the ninth century, so it's sometime in the 800s. So a couple of centuries after Arthur died. And that's actually a really good point, Trevor, is when it gets to Geoffrey or something like that. Oh no, even the Annals Cambriae, it's got two dates. This very successful battle Baden and then his death. So some people argue that Arthur is an amazing pre-Roman archetype of the Celtic warlord. Why would the second thing you record about him is his failure and death?
right, right,
That doesn't make any sense. It makes him incredibly human, for one.
yeah.
Um, and it doesn't in any way represent those values as some sort of unbeatable warrior.
This kind of reminds me, and I always hate to bring up this topic because people have strong feelings about it, but this reminds me sort of the four gospels in the Bible. Like one of the criticisms of them is that as we move chronologically from the crucifixion, they get a little bit more detailed and fanciful. Like the
Mm,
very first one is, I don't know if it's Mark or Matthew, but it's very like it's bare bones. All the
mm,
key events are there, all the important events that you would expect to be there if this crazy thing happened, right? Which so that's kind of different from the Arthur story, I guess. But it's very basic. The plot is simple.
mm.
Crucifixion, resurrection, boom, and then each successive, as we move 100 years into the future with each new gospel, there's way and way more detail.
Yeah,
And so it kind of reminds me of this a little bit, where we have sort of all these things added on later in time.
absolutely.
Except the key difference is the big amazing stuff that you would expect to be there from day one isn't there with Arthur. It is there with, in this case, Jesus. So
Yeah, yeah.
kind of an interesting thing.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. I mean, surely we should see right from day one with the earliest recordings of Arthur, if it was some idea of, as I say, a pre-Roman archetype, we should see those that be able to make those comparative mythology links right from the beginning. But you don't. You have to look at the later stories in order to do that.
Yeah,
Um,
imagine writing down a story about this guy who's, done these incredible things. I mean, like, yeah, you know what? Sword in the stone. I'm not going to write that down. That's trivial.
out.
But this battle, I'm going to put this battle. Anyone can pull a
So
sword out of a stone.
yeah. Yeah, no Lady in the Lake, where's she gone?
I don't know Lady in the Lake. What's that?
Lady in the Lake gave Arthur. So in for a lot of later Arthur nerds, the sword in the stone is not Excalibur, although you know, whatever, it
What?
doesn't really matter. I don't really care either way. But the Excalibur gets given to him by the Lady of the Lake, and that's the sword that has to be returned, often by Sir Bedivere. Um, Sometimes another knight in later stories, like Gawain, then has to return it to the Lady of the Lake when Arthur dies, or goes into hibernation.
Who's the Lady of the Lake?
Sometimes it's this like a sister of Merlin as well,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
somehow related to Merlin. But it's different, as many romances as there are, there'll be a different relationship or different kind of it'll play out slightly differently, depending on who wrote it, basically. Um, but she doesn't appear in the Welsh stories, so
Well, I'm with you. I think I understand your point here, which is just that in the beginning he was historical, and
mm,
that matters that that's how he was in the beginning because that's probably what's true, right? So everything else is, like you said, fan fiction potentially.
yeah, and this definitely seems to be a thing in Welsh culture, um, which is a mythologization of history,
Hmm.
where they take a historical character and then they build an archetype around it. They create something out of it to sometimes as a way of remembering, because this was for a long time an oral culture. So it's a way of building up like a set of words or ideas that are all interconnected. So if you want to remember something and then repeat it, you can do.
Sounds like the Iliad. That sounds like a common
Absolutely.
thing you might do. Yeah.
Um, so um, so I think, but it's interesting it happens that way round. There's a history that's mythologized, whereas the claim at them with Geoffrey is that he historicized myth, which seems to
Right.
be a backwards way of going about it for what we see everywhere else, in my opinion, anyway. Um, so if we want to find, so I like this guy. He's traditionally known. People who look at medieval genealogies, they call him Athris or Athrois ap Myrig. Okay, ap is the same as son of. Sometimes it's spelled map or mab. So if you want to remember that easily, in Irish culture, which is the Sea Celtic, it becomes Mac. So MacDonald, Mac something or other means son of Donald, son of this, right? So the Welsh equivalent is Ab or Ap. Okay, so we've got Athrus ap Myrig. Now, there's I find it quite difficult dealing with Athrus himself, but if we go up the genealogies, his often listed as his grandfather, but we can talk about that issue a bit later on, is a guy called Tudrig. And Tudrig I find really, really compelling for Uther Pendragon. Okay? So when we hear about Uther Pendragon in Geoffrey, we first hear about him as a child. Vortigern, the evil king who's invited the Saxons into Britain, known as Gwytherin in Wales, which means monarch of men. Um, he is going around killing other people who could possibly take over his position as king. And Uther Ambrosius are only children at the time, so their father Constantine sends them to Brittany to go under care of someone called Budic. Um, when they reach a certain age, Ambrosius and Uther come back to Britain to take what's theirs, essentially. There's the implication is that Ambrosius is older, and Ambrosius sort of leads the attacks and is the High King of the Britons, sort of fighting against Vortigern and the Saxons. And we know he is accepted as historical through Gildas's story, which we talked about last week. Um, so that's another historical character right there, right, in amongst everything else, should we say? Um, Uther Pendragon is sent by his brother to campaign in West Wales over this way, which has been um, invaded by the Irish. See, we've got a little arrow coming over here. This is in the post-Roman period, these Irish settlements coming down here. And some of these mixed Irish Brythonic settlements were then coming down into Cornwall. as well. Okay, so Uther is sent to campaign against them. Ambrosius dies. He gets poisoned, either murdered or not. We're not really sure. I think in the story of Geoffrey, he gets poisoned by the Saxons. And then the same thing happens to Uther. He's drinking from his favorite well, the spring that's um, uh, in his house, and that gets poisoned by the Saxons, and he gets really ill. Um, a chap called Lot or Loth takes over from Uther as High King, and he's the son of a Scottish king from Lothian, which is this area up here. And Lot doesn't do too well. Basically, the Saxons have a lot of victories against him. People aren't too confident in him. Um, so Uther kind of struggles off his deathbed. He gets carried to this battle, and the Saxons are they can't believe that he's there, and they flee in terror from him, right? Because they're just, oh my God, Uther Pendragon's still alive, and they run away. And he and then eventually he dies. I've kind of missed out the important bit where he fathers Arthur in the middle. Um, but we did mention that earlier. There's this little civil war between him and Gorlois. Gorlois is his chief advisor and king of Cornwall here in the West Country. Um, so that happens in between. So what we're looking for then is somebody who might fit those events that we see in Uther Pendragon's life. And actually, what we have is possibly three people, um, or at least we have records of three people with a very similar name who are all doing things which are very similar to what Uther Pendragon did. So the
Interesting.
first one is a guy called Tudrig, and Tudrig is a Welsh version of Theodoric, the Germanic name. He's called Tudrig of Garth-Madrun, right? And we assume he's a king of somewhere this area here. He's in a records which are called either the Cognatio Bracken or the other one's something else Bracken. They're two sets of documents which deal with the founding and the royal families of a kingdom called Brycheiniog here in Wales. It's still called Brecon today, right? Named after the eponymous founding king Brychan, right? So Tudrig's here. And he's at war with a guy called Anlac in West Wales. Now, you remember we heard that Uther was campaigning in West Wales. Now, him and Anlac come to some sort of agreement. And what happens is that Tudrig says, you take my daughter Marshall, you go back to Ireland, you have a son. When he's of age, he can come and take this kingdom here in Brycheiniog. Okay? And that's the last we hear of Tudrig of Garth-Madrun. Okay? Just south, we have an area here. We have the grandfather of Athris ap Myrig, who I mentioned earlier, called Tudrig, also called Tudrig. He's known as Tudrig, Martyr of Gwent, and we find him in a very old medieval book called the Book of Llandaff. We find his story. Basically, his story is that he's retired. He's living in a place called Tintern. So Tintern Abbey, you might have heard of. It's painted by a lot of romantics. They wrote poems about it because it's this beautiful tumble down old abbey. They loved that sort of stuff. And Tintern, this place, literally means Din Derin. It means city or town of the king, or what's the word I'm looking for? Fortification of the king, fortified settlement of the king, right? And he's living there. He's in retirement. He's living a religious life, and he hears that his son isn't doing too well, and the Saxons are making headway into the kingdom. And in fact, they're coming right into the kingdom, and they're going to be going through Tintern, where Tudrig is. So Tudrig's retired at this point, and he has to kind of get things all together, get things all in order, so they can hold some sort of defense at Tintern until his son can turn up and uh, basically aid them and defend the kingdom properly, because his son's away campaigning elsewhere. So Tudrig leads the defense, and when the Saxons arrive, they can't believe it's Tudrig. They thought Tudrig had retired, so they're like absolutely terrified of Tudrig. and he manages to hold Tinton, but he doesn't manage to hold it without getting a wound to the head. He gets
So that
taken.
sounds just like the story. Wow.
Yeah, it doesn't sound
Sort of.
very similar, doesn't
Yeah.
it? And he gets taken downriver to a place called Mathern. They used to think it meant Merthyr Teren, so the martyrs king. Um, it's now like Ma Teren, which just means place of the king. So it could have been associated with him long before he died. And now still there is St. Tudric's church and even a holy well with a little spring of St. Tudric as well. Okay.
Wow.
So we've already got a couple of things going on there.
Do any of them have a kid who becomes a king?
Well, will his son certainly does have a he does have sons who continue to be kings of their local area, certainly.
Gotcha.
For one, definitely. But we've got one more character as well. In Cornwall in the West Country, we have someone who appears in lots of the saints' lives, from St. Gwynia, St. Pedrock, St. Breca, um, all of which describe this local king known as Tudor, or sometimes Theodoric, right? So there is a difference in names here. Theodore is a Greek name, meaning of God or something like that, whereas Theodoric, the Theo in Germanic names means of people rather than of God. So these sorts of names can get mixed up quite easily because this it looks the same as Theo, but they do actually have different meanings. But Tudor in Cornwall gets called Tudor, and he gets called Tudrig, basically. And he's known as like a punisher of saints, but the saints he seems to most be going after are the ones that call themselves Irish and are coming over from from either from here, from Indyfed, or straight from Ireland. Now, this is interesting because one of the things that Gorlois did when Uther Pendragon went to war with him for his wife was he started getting reinforcements from Ireland, and Gorlois was king in Cornwall, right? So we have Tudor in Cornwall fighting Irish missionaries. We have Tudrig in South Wales dealing with Irish incursions in West Wales. We have Tudrig in South Wales fighting the Saxons, retiring, coming out of retirement in order to fight the Saxons as well. All of these build up a character with a very similar name, all doing these things that Uther Pendragon did. Now, some people aren't so sure on this, but this really works for me. A lot of times when they record names is they will knock letters off the beginning of them. Or sometimes if they begin with a vowel, add a new letter, add a letter at the beginning. Um, Often in this sort of orthography, when they're writing, th gets written as a d or a t. So I think Uther could just be the name Tudor, straight up. It's had
Yeah.
its T knocked off the beginning, and the D has become the TH has just become a D. It's just Tudor. Tudor can becomes Tuther or Uther, right? You
Yeah.
get the name Duder in Brittany, Duder, which is the same name as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if Uther and Tudor are literally exactly the same name. As I say, a lot of people disagree with this for good reasons. That's fine. Uther, because Uther in Welsh can also mean like uh terrible, but terrible in the old sense, like as in terrifying or inspiring. Um,
So it could
so
sort of be a nickname for.
yeah, it could be an epithet or something like that. Um,
So who's your guy of those three? The last one?
well, no, I think they are all the same people.
Mm.
We are looking at one person.
Three different
When
histories of one person. Gotcha.
absolutely. So the the way to one pit I used to fall into would be like, okay, so Jeffrey's the kind of the story version, and then when we look at the saints' lives or some of these histories of certain areas or things like that, that's like the nuts and bolts. That's the truth, right? But this is not. This is wrong. The way I look at it now is that, and this this is my film training helps with this. is each creator of a document was also fulfilling certain generic ideas, right? A saint's life has to have certain things in it to make it a saint's life,
That's right.
right? A knightly courtly romance has to have certain things in it to make it a courtly romance. So it's not like Tudrig, the Martyr of Gwent, is Uther Pendragon, but more like Uther Pendragon and Tudrig, Martyr of Gwent are both um, literary creations of the same historical seed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. One of them is a saint that does the saintly things. One of them is the great high king, and another as the despoiler of saints, the murderer of saints. He's seen as the enemy which the saint has to overcome in order to set their place on Cornish soil. Um, so each one of those is a literary representation. It's none of them is the truth so much, but all of them are trying to get at this essential seed. Um, and I very much think that that seed, that guy, that Tudor, that Tudrig is Uther Pendragon. So, as I said, he is not actually given as Athrois's father, but his grandfather. And this works for some people. So, Caleb, for instance, he likes the idea that there's a certain prophecy which says that Arthur will come after a certain amount of generations from another famous king, from Magnus Maximus. So with Myrig in there, that makes the right amount of generations. Um, but there's also earlier genealogies which show Arthurus as Tudrig's son, which matches exactly what Geoffrey says, that Arthur is Uther's son. And in fact, it's interesting because Arthur is conceived in this sort of slightly dodgy fashion by stealing his mate's wife and tricking her into having sex with him. Um, Arthur is probably Uther probably already has grown children when Arthur's born, and Arthur in the romances is taken on by Sir Ector, Sir Kay's father, and hidden. And it's not until he draws the sword from the stone that he gets recognized as High King, So and he's meant to have become High King at a young age. He's only 15. So there's possibly other political reasons why Arthur's sort of not necessarily directly represented as Tudrig's son,
Yeah, that makes sense.
because it might have been like, oh, we'll tuck him away.
Yeah.
Let's not, we'll bring that up later because some other people might be angry about this.
I mean, that's just a
So
very common historical thing that happens with bastards, right?
yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
They're
Yeah,
just
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of hidden away.
Hmm. So I know this idea about Tudor and Tudor because of a couple of people I mentioned in the first one, two researchers called Wilson and Blackett, and they really brought the Silurian Arthur hypothesis to the forefront. But and I think they did a lot of that work on Tudor as well, identifying all these people as this one character, Uther. Um, but the idea that Athros is Arthur is a lot older than them. This we can go back a lot further. Okay, so for starters, we can go back to 1920s, and if you went to school in Glamorgan in Wales, you would be taught that Arthurus of Myrig was King Arthur, straight
Hmm.
up. They would just tell you. There's
Wow.
some people still with existing books. Arthurus is Myrig, otherwise known as Arthur, King of the Britons, ruled from Caerleon.
You need to get a hold of one of those books.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could probably contact people who have them.
That's cool.
Yeah, yeah. So, but it goes back further than that. You can go back into the 19th century, and we have various antiquarians who favor that idea as well. And possibly, let's go back even further. So I mentioned a couple of times a certain life of St. Cadoc before. For me, this is one of the most important Arthurian texts. Um, Parts of it, elements of it, are definitely thought to be pre-Geoffrey of Monmouth. Okay. Um, which is really important for especially the modern academics. If they want to hear anything about Arthur, they don't care if it's after Geoffrey because they think it's been infected by his filthy lies and imagination.
Hmm.
So Um, there's aspects of the life of St. Cadoc which are thought to be pre-Galfridian, although it's kind of hard to say, and the existing copy is a bit later, right? The existing one we've got. But it's really important because it makes references to Arthur. Arthur's involved before Cadoc's even born. There's a story about like starting it's about Cadoc's conception, right? And Arthur and Sir Bedivere and Sir Kay are chilling out on a mountain in South Wales, and they see this guy storming across the countryside, and he's got a woman slung over the back of his horse. And Arthur's like, "Ah, what's going on here? They seem to be pursued by someone." Sends off Bedwyr as he's known in Wales, Bedwyr and Kay, sends them off, finds out what's going on. And there's a King Gwynthlew, who's the local king, and he's got this woman Gladys on his back. And Gladys, or her name would be Claudia in Latin. Um, Gladys is the daughter of that King Brucken we were talking of earlier, right? Now, if we're working backwards and we reckon that Tudrig of Garth Madrun was Uther, that makes Brucken Arthur's cousin. Okay.
Mm.
So immediately we've got a story where we've got someone who we think might be connected to Arthur is somehow involved in this story as well. And so Gwynthlu's nicking Brucken's daughter, and Arthur's like, do you know what? I could have her. You know, she looks pretty nice. I could just step in and take her. So, he doesn't come across very nice. Not terrible, but not very nice. And then Bedwyr and Kay are like, ah, come on, be a decent bloke. Come on, sort this out. And Arthur's like, oh, all right then, all right. I'm gonna side with Gwynthlew. He can marry this woman. We'll send Brucken's men back. So Arthur has a really important role in just the birth of St. Cadoc, right? So straight away he's involved in this guy's life. Now, when we then look at how Cadoc's genealogy is explained later, you can create the dendrograms, you can create the family tree. And in fact, in Cadoc's life, it makes the connection between um, Tudrig, the mother of Marshall, and Tudrig, Martyr of Gwent. That life is 800 years old, and it makes that connection,
Wow.
right? That's not me and you today, or Wilson and Blackett saying, "Oh, I think these guys are the same because they got the same name."
Right.
That life does it that many years ago. Okay, so in that life, it says, "Yep, okay, so that's Gladys. Gladys is a daughter of Brucken. There's Brucken. Brucken's mother is Marshall. Marshall's father, that's Tudrig. And Tudrig, he's the Martyr of Gwent. He's the father of Myrig. And then he's the father of Athris. So that it doesn't necessarily say that Athris is Arthur, but it connects those people up that we just connected. All right. And it does that 800 years ago. Okay.
Wow.
The next step, we can look at some lives. We've got some lives in Cornwall. There's one of St. Endelienta, I believe, and she's having some problems with the local king. She's the daughter of King Brucken, so she calls in her cousin, King Arthur, and King Arthur comes and sorts it out. So in that life there, we have someone saying, yeah, Arthur is a cousin of Brucken, right? Well, who do we know is a cousin of Brucken? We know that Athras is a cousin of Brucken, right?
Mm.
On his mother's side. And in fact, there's not any other options on his mother's side. Maybe there's an Arthur on his father's side. Don't know. But there's definitely only one Athras on his mother's side. So that is the cousin of Brucken. And that's a life that's probably 500 years old. So how old is this idea that Tudrig, Martyr of Gwent, is Uther and that Athras is Arthur? Possibly at least as old as the life of St. Cadoc.
Mm.
This all sounds super reasonable. Is there any
Okay.
mainstream investigation into this idea? Is this like a
Yeah.
theory others have put forward, or is this you? Are you?
Oh no, no. There's plenty of people who like it. The idea of the Silurian Arthur has definitely fallen into alternative ideas, but just because any idea of a historical Arthur has fallen into an alternative
It's so funny, this
perspective.
idea that like believing that this individual is a real historical person who didn't do magic is a fringe idea. So
Yeah, right. This is so I had a little argument with someone on Facebook where I said, the earliest records put Arthur around South Wales and Cornwall. And they said, what records are you talking about? So I listed the early records that do it. He said, oh, well, those records aren't history.
right, yeah,
Arthur's a prehistoric king, blah, blah, blah. And I said, great. What are your records? Oh, well, there aren't any.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
prehistory. Oh, okay. So you demand references from me, knowing full well that you cannot provide the references for something because it's from prehistory. So
Unfortunately, this is what science has become. It's like we've decided what the answer is, so you need to have this incredibly compelling argument to persuade us otherwise. Okay, well, what's your decision based on? Oh, well, that's just what we think. Okay.
yeah.
That that is it's man, that I think that's just an element of human nature. That's true in medicine. That sounds like it's true in history and archaeology and
But
um
that's the thing is that as soon as if you decide that those earliest references from about Arthur, from the Saints' Lives, um, from Annals Cambriae, from Historia Brittonum, if you decide they're not good enough for you, all you've got left is those later romances
Mhm.
with all the
right,
magic, right?
right.
That's all
And
you've got
and
left.
those
There's
can be
nothing else.
dismissed as romances, right?
And
Yeah.
you're in the, as Alan Wilson used to say, the supreme advantage of ignorance, and you can say whatever the hell you want because you don't have to account for any of the early sources. Yeah, he was. Everyone knew the great King Arth, the Bear King, who was the ruler of the Britons when they lived in heaven, and all this. You could say, why not? Just make it up because you don't need to account for the things that say, oh, he was cousin of St. David or cousin of King of Brycheiniog or um, or cousin of St. Endelienta or a cousin of Rewal Mauer, Count of Dumnonay, and all these things which are very grounded in 6th century early medieval characters. If you just deny all that, you can say whatever the hell you want.
Yeah. Wow. Peter, this isn't really fair to you because I'm not sure how much more you have, but I told you before we started recording, I'm sick. I'm feeling a
Yeah.
fever coming on.
Ah,
So I want to maybe ask a couple last questions here as
I
we
think
work.
that's great because I think we've wrapped up Tudoric
Okay.
nicely. And
Perfect.
and if anyone ever wants to talk to me about Tudoric, I can always send them in the right direction.
Let me ask you one last closing thing. So,
Hmm.
and feel free to ignore this question and just summarize, and we can wrap up. But I I think you've made to me a novice who doesn't know anything about this topic. To me, it seems like you've laid out a really reasonable argument based on multiple historical sources and. That just seems like, yeah, of course, this is probably true, or some version of this is true, and that it's kind of silly to just dismiss historical records based on later romances. Like that's silly.
Mm,
And and yeah, these names that you're connecting, you're doing like a sort of scholarship almost. You're doing this
Right.
comparative analysis. It's I think super compelling. But if you had to lean in to one of the more exciting romantic conspiratorial ideas, is there anything about Arthur or the people around Arthur that's maybe a little bit more controversial that you think might be true or rooted in something that's true, or anything fun you want to leave us with?
okay. So I mentioned that there was a possibly a Bronze Age zodiac laid across the hills of South Wales.
Yeah.
The first one. You might have to go back for that reference, Alfredo.
Okay.
Um, some of these, some of the clues are in the place names which exist today. Okay. Just because it's taken us a lot of hammering through comparative mythology, toponymy, um, etymology of names in order to try and find this, would someone in 6th century Britain have already known about it? Just because it's lost to us today, does it not mean that in early medieval Britain, they might have full well known they had a Bronze Age zodiac under their feet?
Right.
Okay. So there is also a suggestion that at least one Ark of the Covenant is hidden somewhere in that zodiac.
What does that
I
mean?
think- So I'm opening up a can of worms there. There's certainly a suggestion that something like the Ark is hidden somewhere in Wales,
I
in
love
South
it.
Wales. In fact, I can talk. There's a very specific hill, actually. Um,
Wow, this might
You
have
know
to
what
be a
that
tease for
means.
our
You have
next
to come
episode.
back.
Yeah.
Right, right.
yeah,
but
yeah.
but can
So,
has
but yeah,
someone looked?
well, I mean, when I was talking to Steve, who's done a lot of the, so Wilson and Blackett really came up with the original idea. Steve's done so much work on it since, thousands of data points he's got. It's absolutely amazing. But his point is, from what he's learned and from what he's studied and the names he looks at, he doesn't want to go anywhere near it.
Okay.
And I mean, if you look at the biblical arc,
Oh,
he
because it will
certainly,
kill you, you mean? Yeah, yeah, gotcha.
yeah, yeah. There is references. He's talking about place names and things which are references to like Babylonian like seals of like curses. You know, like you don't. This is a curse of death. This is a curse.
Yeah.
You don't go fucking. You just don't go near it.
Well,
That seems to be
let's
the
get a
point.
Geiger counter or
Yeah,
something.
I know, right? It's
Right.
on very, very private land as well, I may add.
Mm.
And I do not
Uh,
encourage people to go and look. But if you go on the Britain's Hidden History channel, which I'm sure I've plugged before, you can go and see our founder Ross talking about it, and also Wilson and Blackett's search for the discovery of the Ark of the Covenant as well, deals with that in detail. I mean, I'm certainly of the opinion that there was more than one Ark. Um, I think there was quite a lot. They seem to have a few of these things in Egypt. And I'm also very much of the opinion that the Ark and the Grail are related in more than just in lots of ways. That possibly they're a similar type of technology, whatever that technology might be. Um, and so, yeah, my to bring the sixth century Arthur thing back in is that they might still have been well aware of these things, which are now lost to us, basically.
yeah. Yeah, makes sense. They were a lot closer to the events in question. That makes sense. Well,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say as we wrapped up, I want to do a better job of allowing you to plug things, but you
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
do it. So if you want to just briefly remind everyone about this channel that you're a part of, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, so Britain's in history, you can find it on YouTube. It was started by a wonderful guy called Ross Broadstock who put his everything into it and he did amazing things. Me and my colleague Adam, then after Ross's passing, we were managed to produce some content for it and we were invited onto the show. We've done our best to try and keep on doing something in Ross's memory. And there's quite a few other contributors from the group who also put videos in. So there's different stuff on there, plus a backlog of, loads of stuff that you can watch. And then associated books, especially to do with these writers, Wilson and Blackett. Ross did a lot of republishing their work that would have been, just disappeared into, the depths of eBay, essentially, if it wasn't for Ross republishing them. So, yeah, loads of great stuff on Britain's Hidden History, and lots of other channels associated with it as well, who are into the same sort of thing. So
Well, fantastic. Britain's Hidden History. I will put a link to the YouTube in our show notes, both on
yeah,
the YouTube and on the
and I will send
podcast.
you a link for a video by a guy called Rob Shaw, who also is part of the Britain's Hidden History group, and he goes through Tolkien's speech to the Oxford Celtic Society, which is an absolutely fantastic video, and I'll send you the link to that.
Oh, fantastic. So, yeah, if folks want to learn more about that, please check out those links. Also, please wait patiently for Peter's forthcoming book, which we are helping him publish, which
Oh
will
yes.
detail all of this stuff. Are we
Well,
sharing are we sharing a title yet? Well, maybe not all of it,
yeah.
but
As I say, we haven't even got to my work yet.
oh, really? Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to that will have to
Yeah.
be it. Go ahead.
Arthur's Lost Empire is what we're working with.
I love it. Arthur's Lost Empire, possible subtitle, Knights
Yeah.
and Saints.
Love it.
Oh, yes.
Great title.
Love it.
Well, Peter, this was very interesting. And if you're willing to, obviously, I know you want to, you got to be careful with your credibility and everything. But if you want to come on here and talk about the Holy Grail with us, obviously, we would love that.
Or
I
the
would,
Ark.
I desperately wanted to get into some historical Arthur stuff, but I'm also happy to talk about and speculate about the fun stuff. I don't, it's why the hell not?
Yeah, we could do a
It's
little of
fun.
both. We could do a little of
Yeah.
both. It doesn't.
There
We
you
don't
go.
have to go. We don't have to go balls to the wall crazy. But
No.
Not all the time.
I mean, the stuff that makes the crazy stuff fun is that it could be historical. Maybe you
Right.
never know.
Mm.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Peter Alfredo. Thanks for joining us.
Yes.
You
Yeah,
sound
thank you
great.
both.
Peter, that was awesome. Thank you.
No, thank you for joining us,
Oh
Alfredo.
no, that was so good.
Great.
Stick
So
around
good.
so we can say bye properly. Peter, I'll wrap up right now. Thanks everybody. Please buy my book, you cheapskates. God's Eye View.
It's a great book.
Check out the interview I did on Brothers of the Serpent. I had a great time over there. I know all of our listeners.
Brilliant.
You listened to it.
Nice.
Brilliant.
Oh, thank you, Peter. Appreciate it. So yeah, check that out, and then email us at happyfoolspodcast@gmail.com. See you, everybody.